Unlike a lot of the entrepreneurs I know, I didn't have this desire to be one growing up. The amount of disruption that's going to come from that space is very significant. And if anybody can do anything better than us, then there's no reason we can't be as good or better.
Abir, thank you so much for being here.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So, manager at EY for a couple of years, you were the VP of finance in the US, and then you decided to start your own company. Why did you jump into the entrepreneurial world 5 years ago?
Honestly, it was much more a question of circumstance and opportunity rather than any sort of intention. I think, unlike a lot of the entrepreneurs I know, I didn't have this desire to be one growing up. I never really thought about it. To be honest, there was no part of my mind that even really considered it an option. I have immigrant parents, and they kind of raised me in the classic way where they just tell you to get an education, get a good job, and that was kind of what was in my head my entire life. So even having my own business was not something I really ever thought about, aspired to, nor thought really was a possibility. What happened was that while I was a VP at that startup in Texas, I abruptly had to leave to just kind of go closer to home to help my family with some health issues. And because of the responsibilities that I had, I knew they weren't able to just suddenly have me leave and kind of not have somebody backfill the situation or the responsibilities that were there. So I offered to help them out by just doing a contract for 6 months to kind of bridge the gap, essentially. So it was going to be maybe like call it 60% of the workload that I normally had, but just kind of the critical stuff necessary for them to be able to find that new person to replace me. And given that I kind of had my first client, if you will, right off the bat, I thought to myself, well, if I'm ever going to try this out, this would be the easiest and low
Mhm.
risk way to do it. I already have a client that takes up half my time. It'd be kind of hard to get a full-time job while also helping the company transition. So let me give it a shot, see if I can actually find some clients and find things, find other people to work with. And that just kind of worked, I suppose. So 5 years later,
Yes.
we're at about 50 people now.
That's amazing. And were there people back in the day who helped you out to just get started, or you just were winging it and seeing how it evolves and tackling every challenge as they come?
It was very much me winging it. I've been very good at just kind of learning stuff as I go most of my life, I suppose. And so, maybe even to a detriment, I think I was very good at always figuring stuff out to an extent that I hesitate to ask questions even when I should, just because I'm like, I'm sure I can figure it out. Maybe it's a little bit of an overconfidence that kind of develops when you are good at figuring stuff out. But no, never really had anybody to rely on other than I suppose my co-founders. But to be honest, it was also their first time. They happened to quit the jobs that they were at right around the same time that I moved closer to home. So when I actually reached out to one of them to ask him, just to ask him some completely unrelated questions, I found out that he was also looking to start something, and then I kind of pitched him the idea that I had for the company, and he was pretty excited about it. So we kind of joined forces there. So we had each other to work with and rely on, but it was first time for all of us.
How do you know that this is the right person to work with? I mean, you might know some people, you might have good friends and good relationships, but starting a business with someone, has its risks, and there should be something beyond a good relationship. So how did you know that this was the right person to start a business with?
In the case of my co-founders, I'd known them for a very long time. So you mentioned that I was a manager at EY. The three of us actually started the same day at EY, like 10, 12
Okay.
years ago, whatever it was at this point. So we've known each other for a very long time. In my case, I mean, they were friends. They were people that I trusted. I'm also, I guess, maybe not the biggest worrier, I suppose. I figured I'll just work with them and I'm sure it'll work out. Worst case, we'll split up if we have to or something. In fairness, I think it's because it's a service business that makes it a little bit easier to kind of, or maybe not, but in my head, I just didn't really worry about the mess it might create if things didn't work out. Fortunately, it did. But to my mind, working with friends and people I trusted, especially when I was at a stage where I definitely didn't have the confidence to start something all on my own, it was definitely more worth it to have people that I could work with rather than trying to figure out completely on my own.
Do you feel like you had complementary skills or you were both good at the same thing since it's the service business?
Yeah, it's a good question because especially in service businesses, especially in professional services, it's very common for people to kind of have very overlapping skill sets. I'd say there was a fair bit of overlap insofar as like the work that we actually did for clients. A little bit of diversity between the three of us, but a fair bit of overlap as well. I think where a lot of the diversity of skill sets came in was with respect to the administrative side. So in the first year, we were all three of us were just trying to get as many clients as we could find, get as much revenue as possible, just try to make as much money as quickly as possible. But then after a year or two, when we started hiring people and I started to turn less of like just a trio of freelancers and more into like a real business, that's when like those additional skills became a lot more relevant. And in that case, there is a fair bit of a difference between our skill sets when it comes to the administrative side.
Do you feel like because of your past positions, you were able to leverage that to get clients, or did that not help at all?
It definitely did, especially because of the fact that I focused the service on the niche that I had the most expertise with. So while I was a VP finance at that startup, weirdly, we acquired an e-commerce brand and somehow I ended up running it. The expertise that I developed running an e-commerce brand and with so much depth is why it made sense when we started the consulting firm that focuses on e-commerce brands. I was in a position to be able to demonstrate a very significant amount of depth of expertise with respect to e-commerce and help clients at a level that people usually in my position can't. So very much it was me leveraging that previous experience and kind of making sure that I focus on that particular niche for the business.
Mm. All right, let me just jump right into it. At Upcounting, we offer a variety of consulting services, all focused on helping you making better decisions and scaling your business. That sounds pretty broad. Can you narrow it down to me? What exactly do you do at Upcounting?
Yeah, sure. That's probably something I need to improve on our marketing because I do think it might be a little bit broad. The problem is that it is a little bit true. We do actually have a fair bit of variety in the types of work we do, though we're trying to kind of narrow that in a bit more just for I suppose operational simplicity. But if I had to put it very simply, we do bookkeeping, accounting, CFO services for and tax services for e-commerce brands, but we also do provide more consulting-like services, which is where that breadth comes from. So we can help with ERP implementations, we can help with new website developments. We even do growth consulting, so Facebook ads and Google ads. So there is quite a bit of variety of services, but like I mentioned, I think that probably was something that was a consequence of us trying to scale rapidly and us just leveraging every opportunity we had to use a skill set in our tool belt or all the tools in our tool belt, so to speak, to be able to kind of get revenue early on. It probably did create a little bit of a plateau at a certain point where just kind of the breadth of services became a little bit too challenging to scale operationally. So now we're in a position where we're trying to like focus that in a little bit more and hone in on the things that we believe to have the most scale potential.
You have a pretty big team now. Did you have experience hiring people, or did you just learn in the beginning, hire the wrong people, had to like shuffle things? How was that process?
I had a little bit of experience hiring people while I was working at the startup. So I did hire people for operations, finance, HR, marketing. So there was a little bit of experience there, but certainly the depth of experience and the level of my skill has increased substantially, kind of doing a lot of the hiring for our firm today.
Do you feel like there needs to be a certain profile for people that work in a startup? Because you worked at UI as a manager, and I'm sure that some people there would probably not fit in a startup environment. So do you take that into consideration as well when you're looking for people?
It's a very astute observation, and yeah, it's something that becomes very obvious to me over and over as we do hire people. I think that what's interesting is in our case, there is maybe to put it simply, a bit of a split between the people who do the work for clients versus the people who are on the administrative side, if you will. When it comes to the people that we're hiring to do client work, they just need to be good at dealing with clients, good at doing the actual CFO or accounting work, whatever it is that they do. And so for them, there's maybe a little bit of a different profile than we look for versus the administrative people who are much more responsible for and involved in kind of like the growth side of things. Um, we are growing rather quickly, especially for a service business, and especially with my background in startups, I do tend to have a bit more of a startup mentality in terms of kind of like the dynamism and the way that we kind of just tackle problems very nimbly and finding MVPs to things, and then kind of building on top of that and just kind of moving fast to accomplish things. And so certainly when it comes to people who work in a more administrative side of things, there is that aspect where if they don't necessarily have that sort of background, nor or at least not an affinity for that type of environment, then they do kind of find it a little bit more challenging. So we'll have some people who will join us from, say, larger companies who, for example, and that's kind of why I don't tend to hire from larger companies as much as I used to. But for them, the amount of change and the amount of just kind of like figuring stuff out and kind of building from scratch oftentimes is a little bit too overwhelming. But the people who come from startups, they love it. It's a it's definitely like a vibe they appreciate. And I guess sometimes unknowingly that was a vibe I was creating just because that's what
Mhm.
I also enjoyed and what I got used to.
I want to talk a bit about the relationship with your clients. I've had the same accountant for years, and when I tell people how much he's charging me, they're like, "You know what? Maybe you should change your accountant because that's not the normal rate." I'm like, "You know what? I'm
Mhm.
just used to him." Do you feel like, since you're in that field as well, do you feel like businesses stick around with you? It's been a couple of years, or do you have like a very high turnaround?
No, it's definitely one of those very, very sticky services, and that's kind of part of the reason I also opted for a business like this. The CAC to LTV ratio is fantastic, so it can be it's a bit of a double-edged sword because people don't like to leave their accountants, so that also makes it hard to acquire businesses because of the fact that
Mm,
they don't want to leave their accountant. So it can be a little bit difficult to get them to switch to us. But when they do, they basically never leave. So the way that we are still able to kind of make one edge of that sword sharper than the other, if you will, is that on the one hand, the quality of our service is far better than anything kind of like any of our competitors offer. And I was very, very adamant on kind of making sure that we're able to put together a product that is genuinely superior to anything. Like my philosophy was like, if anybody can do anything better than us, then there's no reason we can't be as good or better. So there's very much a maniacal drive towards improving the quality of our service, such that it's oftentimes a no-brainer for people to switch to us because the quality of the competition is just nowhere near what we can do. But the other aspect of it is also the niche that we chose. So because of the fact that we're in e-commerce in particular, it's nice because it's a relatively new industry compared to something like manufacturing or real estate. And a lot of the companies are young, they're very new. So a lot of times there's companies who aren't even, I don't have to worry about them switching from an old accountant, they don't even have one. So they're new companies that are kind of coming into play. They need to find their first accountant, and if we're the obvious kind of front runner in the field, so to speak, that's we don't have to
mm.
convince them to switch from anybody. So on both those fronts, it makes it a little bit easier. But the nice thing is that once they do switch, they basically never leave.
I want to talk about the consultancy side as well, because let's be honest, consultancy's got a bit of a bad rep over the past
Mhm.
couple of years because a lot of talk, very little practical use, and it's very competitive. There's a lot of
Mhm.
people doing consulting. So how do you think you differentiate yourself? Is it because you're sticking to that particular industry? Is it because you're using specific tools? You have a certain methodology based on your past experience working in the Big Four? Tell me.
I'd say it's a combination of niche expertise. So I think it's not about just kind of coming in with this vague sort of promise of we just make you better or whatever. Because we have a niche expertise and we're able to kind of point to specific things and ways that we help brands. That's a very helpful aspect of it that kind of removes any sort of that sleaziness. We also don't call ourselves management consultants. So I suppose there's that aspect where we have a little bit of a disconnect from the cliche management consultants, if you will. But then the other aspect of it just comes down to the marketing. So a lot of it comes from my personal brand and kind of like the content that I put out and uh, developing trust with people in the e-commerce sphere and kind of showing up in conferences, speaking with other people, associating with other brands that are well known. So it's just kind of developing a reputation over time. So people can basically we can benefit from that trust that's developed from those partners that we work with. So if there's other people that are well known in the e-commerce sphere and we work with them, it's a much easier sell to make, if you will, because you're like, yeah, we work with these guys. Everybody speaks very highly of us. I don't really have to do too much convincing.
You feel like your personal brand impacts your business as well? I mean, it's not just
Definitely.
the business's brand, it's you personally as Abir.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I only started building a personal brand a couple of years ago because I realized it was something that was going to be important to be able to grow the business. I'm not really a social media guy personally. I don't really like doing it, but I figured of the three co-founders, I was the only one who was going to do it. So I figured it was necessary. So I started just investing in it. And unfortunately, it has worked. We've gotten a lot of our growth as a result of that. But because the personal brand was started for the purpose of the business, like they're kind of synonymous in the sense that when people, at least in certain spheres, when they think of our company, they think of me specifically. And when people see me, they think about our company.
That's great. Now I need to ask about AI. I mean, it's 2025. The AI
Yeah.
question always comes back. So I gotta ask, you're scaling very quickly. There's so many new tools in the market. People are talking about the next big thing, the Google killer, the this killer. I mean, it's all over the place. How
Mhm.
much how much time do you spend thinking about new ways of automating and integrating these new tools into your current systems?
A fair bit, but I try not to get sucked into shiny object syndrome, if you will. So it's just about pacing myself. I think about it a lot because I'm well aware of the fact that, especially in the accounting sphere, there is a very significant belief as to the fact that it is something that is very automatable, and rightfully so. I think some people overestimate how much of it can be automated. Some people probably underestimate it. So it's hard to know exactly how much or how quickly automation will disrupt it. I think there's a point at where automation will probably disrupt or AI will disrupt everything, and that'll just be a very different world we live in at that point when nobody has any jobs. But at least in the short term, I think in the next few years, there is going to be a very significant amount of change that shows up in our industry. I can speak to, for example, some of the previous players, like if you think of someone like Scale Factory raised about 100 million, Bench raised 100 million, Final Loop raised like 60 million. And they all tried to tackle automation of accounting. And they for the most part failed. I mean, Scale Factor was a pretty spectacular failure. So was Bench. Final Loop is still around, but they're a little bit newer. But I think the major difference between what happened with them, because I do think that there were some like fundamental business model problems with the way that they approached it, but the big difference is that they were trying to invent automation, whereas now we have access to things like LLMs, which is really, I guess, lowering the barrier to entry insofar as kind of being able to build out an effective automation. So the amount of disruption that's going to come from that space is very significant. And to my mind, while we are very efficient, we use a lot of good processes and we do use technology, we certainly aren't leveraging AI very aggressively. We have a team of people who do human work. And there's obviously benefits to that, but I know that it is something that has to evolve. So part of that, or part of my strategy, if to be able to kind of address that is on the one hand being very diligent about the tools that are coming out because we don't have to build automation from scratch necessarily. There's a lot of other people who know that this is a problem to be solved, a lot of other people who are developing tools, and so it's a question of finding those tools and figuring out how to implement them into our processes such that whatever elements can be automated are automated and whatever needs people. All that ends up meaning we're not going to fire people. It just means that we're going to be able to have way more work or way more revenue per person, if you will, and each person is able to focus on more of the value add stuff rather than the mundane kind of button clicking aspects of things. But at the same time, I'm also aware of the opportunity for us to be able to develop our own technology. So they're both very high priority avenues. Uh, but it's just a question of identifying kind of the order in which to tackle things. And there's just a lot of stuff to constantly build in a startup. So they're probably a few months away from me kind of going really deep on solving those problems, but I've been thinking about it for a year or two.
You're almost 6 years in. Do you still have a lot of interactions with the clients, or are you just delegating everything and thinking bigger picture?
I do insofar as the clients that I personally work with. So there are a few where I will personally work with them. They tend to be the slightly more famous clients, if you will, just because obviously it works well from a marketing perspective as well. That they can talk, given that the personal brand that I have is very much the face of the company. Those clients being able to kind of speak to the fact that they work with me is beneficial. But even for all the other clients, like they know that if there's because I have a little bit of a fairly unique set of expertise for somebody kind of who can provide fractional CFO services. Like I mentioned, because I ran an e-commerce brand for so long, I happen to know the marketing side of things very well. And in the e-commerce world, it's very rare to come across a person who knows the finance side and can be a CFO and also knows the marketing side and can practically be a CMO. So that's a gap that almost nobody I know can bridge. So when we do have clients that have, let's call it more significant issues strategically for from a growth perspective, and really does would benefit from kind of the bridging of that gap, then that's where one of the other team members might identify an opportunity for me to step in and kind of give some advice to the client. Because at the end of the day, even if they're not paying for me to be their CFO, there are clients we want every single person we work with to succeed. So I'm happy to just kind of jump on a call with them and tell them what I see about their business, what their opportunities are, and what they can kind of change to improve things. So um, on a day-to-day basis, they're not really messaging me for, your usual questions, but I'm always available to help the clients that we have. And then there's a few that I work with personally.
So I'm going to end with this. It seems like things are going very well for you, especially with the short amount of time and the scale you've reached in just barely 6 years. What's the next big milestone for you?
I wouldn't know if there's a specific milestone per se. For me, it's just about constant iteration and improvement. If I had to pick a milestone, it might be when we are able to start specifically working on the technology side of things and start developing technology that will, because I think that's the one thing that can substantially give us those exponential improvements in terms of efficiency and margins and scale opportunity. But beyond that, it's just about constant iteration. I mean, there's kind of like a never-ending list of things that I have about things we can improve to make things better. So it's not about one particular thing as much as it is just grinding at getting better forever.
Abir, thank you so much for your time. I love the energy, and this was really a fascinating conversation.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. It was great talking to you too.